After a tie last week, our writers were able to separate the top two ACC squads again in our rankings. Was Duke's second-half dismantling of BC more impressive than UVA getting past a visiting Miami squad? Find out a couple centimeters below. 1. Duke Blue Devils, 20-2, 8-1 last week. 1. The Blue Devils outscored the visiting Eagles by 27 points in their second-half domination Tuesday. The rematch against UVA should be a great one, and one that solidifies the winner at the top of our rankings, for a day or two, at least. Having a healthy Trey Jones will make it a much different matchup than the game in Durham was. 2. Virginia Cavaliers, 20-1, 8-1 last week. 1. The Hoos have had a week off after last Saturday's win against Miami. Some shooting woes and an uncharacteristically large amount of turnovers have some UVA fans worried the team is in a bit of a rut. Will game day and the top 3 matchup in Charlottesville tomorrow be what shakes them out of it? 3. North Carolina Tar Heels, 18-4, 8-1 last week. 3. UNC has been on a complete tear since their embarrassing loss earlier to Louisville. The run of 6 straight wins not only includes blowouts over VT, NCSU, and a clear win in the Louisville rematch, but also has shown the team has probably turned the corner in how Roy wants to approach the lineup and game flow strategy. Duke gets all the headlines with their frosh, but the first-year Tar Heels are going to make some noise through February and March. 4. Louisville Cardinals, 17-6, 8-2 last week. 4. The Cardinals had a bit of a dip in their surprising run of dominant wins, and dropping their rematch against Carolina at home, they responded with a tough win against an undermanned VT team on the road. With games against Duke, FSU, UVA, X2, and a road trip to Syracuse remaining, the road to a top 4 ACC seed is no sure thing for Coach Mac's team. 5. Virginia Tech Hokies, 18-4, 7-3 last week. 5. Buzz Williams' inspirational tweet of the week: "The fun is in the details, competing against the details." Buzz Williams, at Team Coach Buzz, February 7, 2019. Your guess is as good as mine, folks. 6. Florida State Seminoles, 17-5, 5-4 last week. 8. WWWW. FSU's 4-game stretch of wins has helped them leap back into ACC double-bye contention. It hasn't been against the premier conference teams, but by beating the teams that they should beat, including a really convincing win at the Carrier Dome. The Noles look like they should be back in the top 4 discussion. 7. North Carolina State Wolfpack, 16-7, 4-6 last week. 6. Where my state fans at this week? Holler at me in the comments about how Keats is a good coach, please. 8. Syracuse Orange, 16-7, 7-3 last week. 7. After the huge win against Duke earlier in the season, Cuse has fallen back into a normal routine of losing to good teams and beating bad teams. They get Louisville, Duke, and UVA at home still this year, so there are more chances to pick up another marquee win, make the NCAA as a 10 seed, and advance to at least the Elite 8 assuredly. 9. Clemson Tigers, 14-8, 4-5 last week. 9. 3 straight wins over the ACC basement dwellers have the Tigers with some momentum to put them past that NCSU buzzer-beater free throw fiasco. A home game tomorrow versus VT could go a long way to keeping them in bubble contention. 10. Miami Hurricanes, 10-12, 2-8 last week. 12. So this is where the cliff drops off in the conference. While difficult to rank, the king of the bad teams is probably Miami, who lack in depth but do not lack in Chris Likes, who is awesome. 11. Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, 11-12, 3-7 last week. 11. GT hasn't really been competitive since their win over Notre Dame. It's been a rough stretch of losses to Duke, UNC, FSU, and CU. But good news, they play Notre Dame next. 12. Pittsburgh Panthers, 12-11, 2-8 last week. 10. Pitt has lost 6 straight games including an OT thriller against Wake Forest. First-year coach growing pains for sure for the Panthers. 13. Notre Dame fighting Irish 12-11, 2-8 last week. 14. A bummer of a season for the Irish did include a win over their rivals in Catholicism on the road, but they followed it with a convincing loss in Miami. 14. Boston College Eagles, 11-10, 2-7 last week. 13. The Eagles had the lead in Durham at the half. It was awesome. The second half was not. 15. Wake Forest Demon Deacons, 9-13, 2-8 last week. 15. No longer shall we look at Danny Manning's team and proclaim, you only have one ACC win. Rank Caroline Will Brian S. Brian L. Sayer Tiki Neckel Wiley Ellis Ryan Habeck Alex Emily Pierce Rank Caroline Will Brian S. Brian L. Sayer Tiki Neckel Wiley Ellis Ryan Habeck Alex Emily Pierce 1. Duke Virginia Duke Virginia 2 Virginia Duke Virginia Duke Virginia Duke 3. North Carolina 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 4. Louisville Virginia Tech Louisville 5. Florida State Virginia Tech Louisville Clemson Virginia Tech 6. Virginia Tech Florida State NC State Florida State Virginia Tech Florida State NC State Florida State 7. NC State Florida State Syracuse NC State Florida State Syracuse NC State Florida State Syracuse 8. Syracuse Clemson NC State Clemson Syracuse NC State Clemson 9. Clemson Syracuse Syracuse NC State Clemson NC State Syracuse NC State 10. Pittsburgh Miami Boston College Georgia Tech Miami Georgia Tech 11. Boston College Miami Georgia Tech Pittsburgh Boston College Pittsburgh Georgia Tech Miami 12. Miami Georgia Tech Boston College Notre Dame Pittsburgh Notre Dame Georgia Tech Miami Pittsburgh Notre Dame 13. Georgia Tech Notre Dame Miami Pittsburgh Notre Dame Georgia Tech Pittsburgh Miami Notre Dame Boston College 14. Notre Dame Boston College Georgia Tech Notre Dame Boston College Pittsburgh 15. Wake Forest